Do you think most people are morally good? Rutger Bregman, who is a famous Dutch historian, thinks so. He has written a very popular book called De meeste mensen deugen, or in English he calls it A Hopeful History. In it, he argues that most people are good and that we need to stop believing the lie that human nature is depraved. He even goes so far as to suggest that people like Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi war criminal, was not really an evil monster, but just an unfortunate follower of Nazi ideology, who came to believe that he was doing the right thing. I've read the book and I must say that Bregman is a talented writer. His book is captivating. He takes the reader on a journey through human evolution and argues that we have evolved to be friendly instead of cruel. He argues that human evolution is not about survival of the fittest, but about survival of the friendliest. After this, he mainly tells inspiring stories of people who did good things. And that is one of the major flaws of the book. He mostly relies on shallow stories to make his case. But there are many more flaws. In this video I will review a part of the book and show you that he fails miserably in proving that most humans are morally good. Welcome to the channel. My goal is to help you see and defend the truth of Christianity. Rutger Bregman thinks that most people are morally good, but he explicitly mentions that he doesn't mean that we are inherently good.
Wat ik niet denk, is dat de meeste mensen van nature goed zijn. Dat we fundamenteel goed zijn of zo. Ik bedoel, dat is duidelijk niet zo. Wat ik wel wil betogen vanavond, is dat wij mensen eigenlijk twee kanten hebben. We hebben twee benen, een goed been en een slecht been. En de vraag is welke we trainen.
In his book he elaborates on this point and says that he does believe that all of us have a strong inclination towards the good. So we are in a sense wired or evolved to be good. This is quite confusing because he seems to contradict himself. On the one hand, we are not inherently good, but on the other hand, we are wired to do good. Whatever he means, it is clear that he wants to prove that most humans are morally good. If we translate the Dutch title of the book, it says most people are virtuous. After the introduction, he asks the question, is society evil or are we evil? Two philosophers, Rousseau and Hobbes, have very different ideas about human nature and civilization. In a nutshell, Hobbes thought that humans are evil and that society restrains us to act it out, and Rousseau thought the opposite. Humans are good and society shapes us into humans who act evil. Bregman thinks Rousseau is right. In the remainder of the book he tries to show why he thinks so. One wonders how it is possible that society becomes evil if humans are good. Society is made up by humans, so how can it ever become evil? But I won't go into this. Before I discuss the evidence, it's important to point out that Bregman hasn't provided a definition of good and evil, so we can only guess what he means. When you write a book and your main purpose is to show that most people are morally good, it's really strange that you don't explain what that means. Because of this, it's impossible to know whether he has succeeded. So now I have two options. I can end this video and conclude that the rest of the book is irrelevant as long as there's so much ambiguity about good and evil. Or I can provide a definition and use it in my evaluation. I'll go for the second option. As a Christian, I believe that the standard of goodness is God and that Jesus is fully God and fully man. When he walked on earth, he lived a morally perfect life and showed us what it means to be good. He said that the greatest commandment is to love God above all else and to love other people as ourselves. So if we want to know whether we are morally good, we have to compare our lives to the life of Jesus and figure out to what degree we love God and other persons. But Bregman has a secular worldview, so he obviously doesn't think that we should love God. That is why in this video I will not look at goodness from a Christian perspective, but from a secular perspective, so I'll remove God from the equation. I think we can all agree that selfishness is bad and altruism is good. If someone is only concerned about his own well-being and not about the well-being of others, we can conclude that he is evil. The more a person acts out of selfish interest, the more evil he is. Merriam-Webster defines selfish as concerned excessively or exclusively with oneself, seeking or concentrating on one's own advantage, pleasure or well-being without regard for others. On the other hand, if someone is concerned about other people in a similar way as he is concerned about himself, then he's altruistic. Altruism is a description used when we act on behalf of others and we do so selflessly and at cost to ourselves. A true selfless person loves others just like himself. So the more altruistic a person is, the better he is. This is what Bregman seems to imply as well. He talks a lot about selfishness and altruism. But this is still not a clear definition of what it means to be morally good. To what degree does one have to be altruistic in order to be counted as good? The biblical view is that we need to be maximally altruistic to be good. This means that at all times we should love God and others as we love ourselves. This is a really high standard, and if this is true, then we don't even need to investigate whether people are good or evil. Then nobody, except Jesus, is good. But for the sake of argument, let's lower the bar. If people act altruistically most of the time, instead of selfishly, then we assume that they are good. Bregman seems to think there's strong evidence for this. The first line of evidence Bregman presents is that humans tend to be altruistic after a natural disaster has occurred.
New Orleans spoelt onder en het nieuws staat weer helemaal vol met de verschrikkelijkste berichten, cynische nare berichten over mensen die plunderen, mensen die verkrachten, geweldsexplosies, etc. etc. Na een natuurramp, en we hebben inmiddels meer dan 700 case studies van over de hele wereld, na een aardbeving, na een tsunami, noem maar op, dan krijg je stevast elke keer weer een explosie van samenwerking. Mensen van links tot rechts, arm, rijk, jong, oud, gaan allemaal samenwerken. Dat is het belangrijkste wat er gebeurt.
The news about Katrina was only negative. People started plundering and everybody became selfish. The news seemed to agree with Hobbes. Remove food, shelter and a functioning government and some personal safety and people become beasts. Bregman argues that the opposite is true. There were only a few people who started plundering. He presented scientific evidence that actually most people helped each other out. If Bregman is right, what does this prove? Well, at best it proves that not all humans are always completely selfish. I don't see how this is evidence that most people are morally good. Let me explain. First, the example is very shallow. How do we even know whether the altruistic acts are really for the sake of others and not out of self-interest? Bregman doesn't give arguments as to whether the people who helped really were in, as Hobbes called it, a state of nature. A relevant question Bregman should have addressed is, are people really thrown back in a state of nature so that temporarily there's no functioning government at all anymore? Hobbes argued that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war. And such a war as is of every man against every man. In this state, every person has a natural right to do anything one thinks necessary for preserving one's own life, and life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. I'm confident that this usually isn't the case after a natural disaster. Yes, it can be terrible and a lot is destroyed, but the government isn't. There's still a functioning common power. So if you would start plundering, you risk going to jail. And let's not forget that Bregman has the burden of proof to show that after a natural disaster, people are really thrown back to a state of nature. He failed to provide proof, and therefore his argument fails. Second, even if there's good evidence that people act altruistically after a natural disaster has occurred, does this mean that they are morally good? Well, obviously not. Even pathological liars sometimes speak the truth. No judge would set a convicted murderer free if there would be evidence that the murderer once volunteered to help people after a natural disaster. His altruistic acts won't make up for the murder he committed. He remains an evil murderer who needs to be punished. The point is that occasional altruistic behavior doesn't make someone good. On the other hand, occasional selfish behavior such as lying, stealing, committing adultery or murdering usually does make someone evil, even from a secular perspective. A husband who only sleeps with another woman once a year is still an evil adulterer. You might object and think, didn't you lower the bar and say that if people act altruistically most of the time, we can conclude that they are good? So if a husband only cheats once a year, we can conclude that he's morally good because most of the time he's faithful? This is a clear misunderstanding. Because a husband who cheats only once a year is secretly acting selfishly most of the time. He needs to lie to his wife to remain married to her, and his way of life is selfish, because he probably plans to act his evil desires out. It is highly improbable that every time he cheats, this is only an impulsive accident. So, occasional altruistic behavior doesn't make someone morally good, and occasional selfish behavior does make someone morally evil. This fact applies to all of Bregman's examples. It follows that if you want to prove that most humans are morally good, then you need to do far more than presenting some shallow examples of supposed altruistic behavior. What we've seen is that Bregman's book has major flaws. The first flaw is that he doesn't explain what he means with good and evil. This makes it impossible to figure out whether he has succeeded in showing that most people are morally good. The second flaw is that his example is simply too shallow. At his level of analysis, the stories don't prove whether people's actions are altruistic or selfish. In later episodes, we shall see that this is true for all of his examples. The third flaw is that even if his examples were good evidence that people acted altruistically, this does not prove that humans are morally good. Even a pathological liar sometimes speaks the truth. But you might say, well, you've only evaluated one example. Maybe his book works as a cumulative case. That's actually a good point. In my next video I will give a response to his best examples. So make sure you subscribe, and in the meantime watch this video over here, in which I show that good and evil doesn't even exist if God does not exist. Thanks for watching and see you over there.